Welcome to my channel.
My wife and twin brother have been having an affair for 3.5 years. Story 1-3. We were married 16 years and together 19 years. 2 kids, a house, a dog. Living the dream, or so I thought. Sure, we were running around driving kids to hockey and soccer, etc. And there was not much alone time. But from all the people I knew, with kids our age, this seems to be the situation that everyone was in. She just turned off one day. Now, she had been depressed before when her mom was overcome by Alzheimer's and had to be moved into a facility, and my wife never really full recovered from that. I gave her space. This time she came to me and said she was broken and going to a therapist. I asked if we should go to couples therapy. She said yes. I asked her if there was anyone else. She said no. I believed her at first. This was Labor Day 2016. Things weren't adding up. I asked her in couples therapy if there was someone else, and she said no again. All she wanted was to get divorced. This went on for a month or 2. Going to therapy, not really making any progress. The therapist called it limbo. I lost 20 pounds in that month or 2 and couldn't sleep. Finally, she told me that she got drunk at a work conference and gave a guy a job, but I kept my pants on. Now, mind you, she's a vice president at her software company. At this point, I told her I was upset, devastated, but I was willing to work through it. I loved her and still wanted to grow old and gray with her. And that we should get back into therapy. I found us a different therapist, one that my personal therapist recommended. I set the first meeting up for Jan 2, 2017. My therapist told me to just get through the holidays. This was November timeframe now. In early December, I realized that she was done with our marriage and didn't really want to work on fixing it. I also realized that she is lying to me about her affair. I then received a Facebook message from the wife of the guy that she had an affair with. This wife and I have several phone calls and text messages back and forth. I found out it was full on sex several times over the course of several months. I came home that night and confronted my wife, not yelling, just stating facts. She refused to confess, sticking to her job story. I told her what the other wife had told me. She said, "You're going to believe the word of a stranger over me?" And I said yes, because I believe this stranger is telling the truth. But the story doesn't end there. The next morning, my wife comes up from the basement. I asked her leave our bed after she admitted to the job, so she was sleeping in our basement. She came up that morning and her defenses were down. She was no longer angry at me. She was herself again, is the best way to explain it. She felt bad for me. She went with me to get checked for STDs. I had none, thank God. I felt like we were a team again. We sat down and had a long talk. I wanted to try and make it work, and she didn't. It's now just before Christmas. From the other wife, I got the timeline of my wife and her husband's affair, and the timing didn't match up to my wife's total shutdown in August of 2016. So I knew there was more. I asked her. She denied anything else. A day or 2 before Christmas, she was working at home and left her laptop open. I looked into her emails and found the second affair. This a guy that worked directly for her. He was married and had 2 kids. The only good thing was that he lived in Pittsburgh and we live in Boston. So I never had to see him around town or anything like that. He's the total opposite of me. I sat on this information through Christmas. On New Year's Eve morning, I told my wife I read her email and I knew about the guy that worked for her. She said she loved him and wasn't that upset. If anything, she was relieved. I think the lying to me was tough on her. I told her to leave our house. We didn't have the money. I had been at home with the kids for 2 years. So I needed to get a job to make it work financially. I started my job at the end of January and I threw her cheating fat ass out of our house. We went to mediation. I got the house. We split the kids 50-50. It's been tough on our youngest and I feel bad about that. I hope she feels worse. The lies and betrayals and cheating really hurt. It hurt my ego and my sense of self. But I'm in a good place now. The nightmare is over. I feel like myself again. It was an incredibly hard 7 months for me. I have a great support system. I am in therapy and I have a lot of friends. This experience has taught me to be grateful for all the good I have in my life. And that is what I'm focusing on. I focus on the good and I know my life will only get better. Redditors' reactions. Redditor 1, I'm glad you're getting better. Cheating on a good person is like throwing a diamond away and picking up a rock. She will never be happy or satisfied. She will regret her stupidity. Karma as heck and always shows up. She has lost the respect of her children, you and her family. She has no MSXS, no self-respect, and has destroyed other families in her selfish quest. And broken the most sacred and important vow you can make and will pay dearly. Redditor 2, in 1974, I got married to my high school sweetheart. Little did I know, in 1985, she was having an affair with my next-door neighbor for a year. She cut his hair in her private salon I built for her in the basement. I asked her outright in December of '85 if she was having an affair and she admitted. I beat the heck out of him and my life went on. Her life has never been the same. Story 2-3. Back when I was younger, I met a girl, fell completely head over heels in love. After months, almost a year of dating, I popped the question and she said yes. I was on top of the world. The only girl in the world I even cared to look at. Call me old-fashioned at the time, but I waited. I waited until I found the love of my life. We were engaged and we consummated just shortly after. So, I had to move about 2 hours away for college, and the plan was that I got us a place, got settled, I'd come home and we'd get married in about 2 months. Wedding plans were being made, I was doing schoolwork and full-time job, and I'd come home on the weekends to see her. Ran up big phone bills talking to her almost every night. Then about a month before the big day, I called to talk to her. She wasn't home, but I spoke to her mom. Her mom was very hesitant to talk to me, but told me the truth, she was out with an ex-boyfriend. I'm not typically the jealous type, but I knew who he was and had interactions with him before, but I trusted her. I called a mutual friend of ours that evening and spoke to her. We'll say her name was Mary. I asked Mary about what was going on, and she was as shocked as I was because she also didn't know anything was up. Since Mary and my fiancé were best friends, I thought it was odd and I got worried. I felt my heart sink and I think I knew at that point what was going on. The next day comes along, and I call and talk to her. I told her that I called the previous evening but her mom said she was out. She said yeah, me and Mary went out to the movies. Funny, I said, I talked to Mary last night as well. Then proceeded to ask her what was really going on. After a couple very poor attempts to continue lying to me, I told her I knew who she was with and thanks to Mary and other friends where she was and exactly what was going on. She called me about a week later and finally admitted the truth. I don't remember what else she said. 1, I was too drunk, 2, she lied to me and broke my heart. I went through a long fit of depression after that. A lot of drinking, a lot of not caring. I got better over time. I met girls I've cared about, 1 I've even married and divorced. I never really fell in love again. Story 3-3. It was 1985. My now ex-wife Pam and I had been married for a short time, and we were having problems. It's funny. We'd dated for over a year, and everything had been great. We'd lived together for almost a year and a half, and everything had been great. Within weeks of getting married, though, I began having serious doubts. I later learned Pam had been, too. We were both kids in our early 20s, and neither one of us knew how to talk about the feelings we were having, so we just fought. We fought early. We fought often. We fought about any and everything. Just shy of 4 months into the marriage, I moved out. We decided to take a break. To think about things. We actually didn't decide that, she did. I'd strongly objected. I thought we should try working on our marriage together before we tried anything as drastic as a separation, but she'd insisted the only way we could have a chance of our marriage working was if we were apart from each other long enough for us both to realize that being apart was worse than being together. When I finally accepted the fact that we were separating, no matter what I wanted, we both tearfully swore we wouldn't see anyone else during our separation. We promised each other we'd honor our marriage vows and remain true to each other, and we'd only start to see other people if we both agreed to make our trial separation permanent. For the next year and a half, we did this crazy, codependent yo-yo thing, where I would try to convince her not to throw our marriage away, to give it a chance. She'd keep rebuffing me, telling me she just didn't know. Eventually, I'd begin to accept that we weren't going to be together, and I'd start to call and go by less and less often. Then, we'd reach a point where Pam would realize I was beginning to get over her, and suddenly, she'd have to have me, and would begin to chase after me. Each time, I'd be dubious, but she'd be determined, and I loved her, and over time I'd warm back up to her and move back in. Things would be great for a while, but eventually she'd again lose her fear of losing me, and once again, she'd start being less and less sure we should be together. I'd see it happening and try to reason with her. I'd plead with her to see the pattern and break it, but it was like talking to a brick wall, and eventually I'd leave again, heartbroken, and the whole awful cycle would start all over again. Somewhere in this mess, Pam had started hanging out with a co-worker, Ginny. I didn't like it. I'd known Ginny since high school, and she was one wild child. Heavy drinking, hard drugs, you name it. Ginny had jobbed me once under the bleachers at a basket-licking game during halftime while I was supposed to be in the locker room getting yelled at by my coach, and we hadn't even liked each other. I sure didn't want my wife, who often drank or did drugs to the point of passing out, hanging out with Ginny. When I'd expressed my concerns to her, Pam told me not to worry, that when she went out with Ginny's boyfriend, Al was always with them. I'd also known Al since high school. He was a good guy. Steady. Salt of the earth. I felt better knowing he was with them. After a few months of their starting to all go out together, things changed between Pam and me. I couldn't quite put my finger on it. I'd moved back in with her right about time they'd started running together, but soon things were strangely different than they'd been every other time. It was like all the highs and lows had been lopped off. We didn't fight, but we didn't have any really good times, either. She was distant. Unengaged. One night, I couldn't sleep. A pretty common problem for me in those days. I was sitting on the couch thinking about our relationship, trying to figure out what it was that was bothering me. I had one of Pam's many cats in my lap, petting it. The cat jumped off my lap and went tearing after another cat, knocking Pam's crocheting bag over. As I was picking the crocheting stuff up and putting it back in the bag, I saw there was a phone bill in the bottom of the bag. Now Pam was very organized, and had a desk with assigned cubicles for every bill. It made no sense that this phone bill would be in her crocheting bag. I looked at the bill, and one call immediately stuck out to me. It was to my phone number and had been charged from a number in a city 50 miles away. I remembered the call. Pam had gone away for the weekend to see her parents, and had called me on Sunday morning before she'd left to drive home. She'd been strangely weepy on the call, telling me she loved me over and over, but had no answer that made any sense when I'd asked her what was wrong. I called the number and it was a Best Western motel. Her parents lived 100 miles away from that Best Western. I woke Pam up and immediately confronted her with the phone bill and the call from the motel. Pam was a very skillful liar, but in her groggy state, she didn't even try to bullshit me. She confessed that she and Al had been having an affair and they'd spent the weekend she was supposed to have been with her parents together in that motel. Man, it hurt. All these years later, though, I know it's the best thing that ever happened to me. It broke the cycle of codependence we'd been stuck in, and I was able to tell her to go duck herself and get on with my life. It also taught me a valuable lesson, one of the most important of my life. I'd known something was wrong for months, but every time I'd broached the subject with Pam, she'd argued me off of it, gaslighting me into thinking I was crazy and paranoid. Now, I know. When things don't feel right, they aren't. Redditor's reactions. Redditor 1. Ginny had jobbed me once under the bleachers at a basket-licking game during halftime while I was supposed to be in the locker room getting yelled at by my coach, and we hadn't even liked each other. I don't know about you, but a decent person doesn't get a random job from a crackhead. These things don't just happen. Redditor 2. I never said I was a decent person. I told a story. B. She wasn't a crackhead, we were both in high school. She was the wild child, I was the jock. Redditor 3, haha, you know, I actually wanted to add you were the usual jock, weren't you? But I deemed it a bit too generalizing, guess I was right though. No bad feelings intended, it's just that every story has two sides, and yours would certainly prove to be an interesting read from the other side. Redditor 4, what a surprise to learn your NPD. Redditor 5, I write my truth. Like it, or not, that's your right, but going on to multiple posts and spreading your vitriol is just plain creepy. I poured everything I had into my marriage for years, long after everyone in my life was pleading with me to let go. I didn't go into every detail of my efforts to save my marriage because the question was regarding how I figured out she was cheating. I skimmed over the background, as I did on all of the narcissistic love bombing, blame shifting, gaslighting, reality warping and insane tirades from my now ex-girlfriend with the bad tooth. The question was about the stare. The rest was background. By the way, someone absolutely must have someone, pursues them relentlessly, gets them, loses interest, makes it their fault, and discards them. Repeat, repeat, repeat. Sound familiar?
Thank you for watching. Comment what do you think about this situation. Don't forget to like and subscribe.